I'm sorry, ma'am. The flight to Chicago is completely full.
There has to be something you can do. My grandson just had emergency surgery.
I truly wish I could help, but every seat has been assigned.
Come on. We've all heard stories like this before.
Exactly. Why do people always expect strangers to sacrifice their own plans?
The elderly woman lowered her head, embarrassed. At that moment, a young black woman quietly stood up from her seat. She walked toward the counter and placed her boarding pass on the desk.
Transfer my ticket to her. Ma'am, this is your seat.
I know, but then you'll miss your flight to Chicago.
She needs it more than I do.
The entire gate fell silent because the woman she had just helped was carrying a burden she had been hiding for years. And before long, Jasmine would find herself standing in the middle of a family war, a dangerous secret, and a truth powerful people were desperate to keep hidden. But before anyone could expose it, someone would mysteriously disappear. Stay until the end because one decision at an airport is about to change countless lives forever. A cold February wind moved across Detroit Metropolitan Airport while light snow drifted beyond the giant windows overlooking the runway. At 29 years old, Jasmine Carter never imagined that one decision made in less than a minute could completely alter the direction of her life. She was an African-American woman from Detroit, Michigan, standing 5 feet 8 inches tall with dark brown skin, warm hazel eyes, and shoulder-length natural curls usually tied into a simple low ponytail. She was not the kind of person who drew attention in a crowded room. Her beauty came from her calm presence, her gentle smile, and the quiet confidence she carried after years of learning how to survive difficult circumstances without complaining. Life had never been easy for Jasmine. 4 years earlier, she had lost her mother to pancreatic cancer, and since then, she had become the person holding her small family together. She worked hard so her younger brother, Ethan Carter, could continue chasing his dream of becoming a civil rights attorney. Ethan was 21 years old, tall and lean with short black hair, kind eyes, and a naturally optimistic personality that somehow survived every hardship life had thrown at him. Jasmine often joked that he had inherited all of their mother's hope, while she had inherited all of her worries. 2 weeks ago, everything changed. After 6 years of loyalty to a transportation company in Detroit, Jasmine had been laid off during a company restructuring. No warning, no appreciation, no farewell speech, just an email and a cardboard box for her belongings. She had spent several nights lying awake, staring at her apartment ceiling, wondering how she was going to pay rent, keep up with bills, and help Ethan stay in school. Then an opportunity arrived. Wilson Capital Group, Chicago, Director of Operations interview. The company was mysterious. There was very little information about it online, yet its name quietly appeared behind major projects throughout the Midwest. Jasmine did not understand why she had been selected for an interview, but she was not about to waste the opportunity. Unfortunately, opportunity came with a price. She had used almost all of her remaining savings to purchase a one-way ticket. As she sat near gate C-17, she checked her bank account one final time. $23.18. That was everything she had left. She smiled to herself, not because she was happy, but because sometimes people laugh to keep themselves from falling apart. Her hand moved instinctively toward the silver necklace beneath her sweater. Attached to it was a small coin that had once belonged to her mother. Every time Jasmine felt afraid, she held it for a few seconds. Her mother's voice immediately returned to her memory. Character is built when nobody is watching. Those words had guided her entire adult life. Suddenly, voices erupted near the gate counter. An elderly woman was speaking with the airline employee. Jasmine looked up. The woman appeared to be around 72 years old. She was Caucasian, standing about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with soft silver hair resting neatly above her shoulders and pale skin touched by decades of life experience. She wore a beige wool coat, practical black shoes, and simple leather gloves. Nothing about her suggested wealth or status. In fact, she looked like someone's grandmother who had rushed out of the house without thinking about herself. But her eyes told a different story. There was strength there, there was dignity, and tonight there was fear. "Please," she said softly, "I need to be on this flight." The airline employee sighed sympathetically. "I'm sorry, ma'am, there are no seats left." The woman swallowed hard before speaking again. "My grandson underwent emergency surgery in Chicago tonight. I need to get there." Before anyone could answer, a man's voice interrupted. "People will say anything these days." Several travelers turned around. The speaker was a wealthy-looking man in his mid-50s with slick gray hair, a sharp jawline, and a carefully groomed beard. He wore a dark navy overcoat and an expensive gold watch that flashed every time he moved his hand. Years of privilege had given him an air of superiority that seemed almost effortless. Standing beside him was his wife, a blonde woman around 50 years old with perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, and diamond earrings that sparkled under the airport lights. Her expression carried the same quiet arrogance. She shook her head. That's a very convenient story. The elderly woman lowered her eyes. She did not argue. She simply said again, please. Jasmine felt her chest tighten. Suddenly, she was no longer sitting inside an airport. She was 6 years old again, watching her mother beg hospital staff to keep Ethan overnight because they could not afford additional treatment. Some memories never disappear. The wealthy man folded his arms. You can't expect strangers to sacrifice their own plans. His wife glanced toward Jasmine. People are always looking for sympathy. That sentence did something to her. Not anger, not outrage. Exhaustion. Jasmine was simply tired of watching kindness disappear from the world. She stood up. She walked to the counter. Then she placed her boarding pass in front of the employee. Transfer my seat to her. The gate became silent. The employee blinked twice. Ma'am, are you sure? Jasmine nodded. Yes. The elderly woman's eyes widened. No, sweetheart, I can't take this from you. Jasmine offered a small smile. Yes, you can. The woman stared at her for several seconds before tears gathered in her eyes. Then she accepted. Before boarding, she reached inside her coat and handed Jasmine a white business card. If you ever need anything someday, call this number. Jasmine accepted it politely. She never intended to use it. She had not helped her for a reward. Several minutes later, the woman disappeared into the jet bridge. The wealthy couple immediately began whispering. The blonde woman laughed quietly. A girl dressed like that shouldn't be giving away expensive plane tickets. Her husband nodded. Poor decisions usually follow poor people. Jasmine ignored them. She sat back down. For the first time all night, fear quietly entered her mind. What had she just done? She had given away her only chance. No flight, no backup plan, no certainty about tomorrow. She looked down at the white card. Elegant. Simple. No company logo. No title. Just a name. Eleanor Wilson. At that exact moment, an older airport employee carrying a clipboard walked by. He glanced at the card and immediately stopped. His face changed. He looked at Jasmine. Then back at the card. Where did you get that? Jasmine frowned. The woman who just boarded gave it to me. His eyes widened. You know her? No. I met her tonight. His radio suddenly crackled. Someone was calling him. Before leaving, he leaned closer and lowered his voice. If that's really Eleanor Wilson, then you just helped one of the most powerful people in Chicago. Then he walked away. Jasmine remained frozen in her seat. Outside, snow continued falling across the runway. Inside her hand rested a simple white card carrying a name she had never heard before. Eleanor Wilson. Who exactly was she? The following morning, Detroit woke beneath a pale gray sky while thin layers of snow rested quietly on parked cars and empty sidewalks. Inside her small apartment, Jasmine Carter sat at her kitchen table holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. She had slept less than 3 hours. Not because she regretted helping Eleanor Wilson, but because she finally had time to think about what she had lost. Her opportunity was gone. Months of applications, dozens of interviews, countless rejection emails, and one final chance had disappeared the moment she handed over that boarding pass. Still, something inside her refused to call it a mistake. Her mother's voice returned once again. Do the right thing, even if life doesn't reward you immediately. Jasmine smiled sadly. Sometimes she wondered how her mother had remained so hopeful despite living a difficult life. At 8:17 that morning, her phone rang. An unfamiliar Chicago number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? A calm female voice answered immediately. Good morning, Miss Carter. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I am Eleanor Wilson's executive assistant. Jasmine sat upright. Rebecca Hayes sounded professional and composed. She was 53 years old, though Jasmine would not meet her until later. Rebecca was known throughout Wilson Capital Group for her extraordinary memory and quiet efficiency. She was a slender Caucasian woman with shoulder-length auburn hair streaked with gray, fair skin, and gentle green eyes hidden behind thin reading glasses. She had spent 26 years working alongside Eleanor and had become one of the few people Eleanor completely trusted. Jasmine swallowed. Is everything okay? Rebecca spoke kindly. Mrs. Wilson wanted me to tell you something personally. She knew you would never call that number. Jasmine remained silent. Rebecca continued. She also knew you would never ask for help, even after sacrificing your own opportunity. Jasmine looked down at her coffee. She did not know how to respond. Mrs. Wilson has already arranged transportation for you. A flight to Chicago departs in 2 hours. Jasmine blinked. What? The ticket has been paid for. A driver will arrive at your apartment in 30 minutes. Jasmine immediately shook her head even though Rebecca could not see her. I appreciate that, but I can't accept expensive gifts. Rebecca laughed softly. It's not a gift, Miss Carter. Mrs. Wilson insists that life should not punish kindness. Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment. That sentence stayed with her. Life should not punish kindness. No one had ever said that to her before. After ending the call, she stood motionless in her kitchen. Part of her wanted to refuse. Part of her wanted to protect her pride. But another part of her remembered Ethan, his tuition, their overdue bills, their uncertain future. Perhaps accepting help was not weakness. Perhaps it was simply allowing life to move forward. 2 hours later, Jasmine arrived in Chicago. The city was larger than she expected, filled with steel towers and busy streets carrying a sense of old money and quiet influence. The driver brought her to a 48-story glass building downtown, Wilson Capital Group. She stared upward. The company was far bigger than she had imagined. Inside the lobby, she noticed something unusual. There were no giant advertisements or flashy displays celebrating success. Everything felt restrained, professional, private, as though the company did not need to prove its importance. Rebecca Hayes greeted her personally. She was exactly as Jasmine had imagined. Graceful, composed, and warm without being overly friendly. Mrs. Wilson is waiting for you. Jasmine followed her upstairs. The office occupied an entire floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline. Standing beside those windows was Eleanor Wilson. Today, she looked different, not because she wore expensive clothes, but because confidence had replaced vulnerability. The frightened grandmother from the airport was gone. Instead, Jasmine saw a woman who had spent decades leading people. Eleanor smiled. You made it. Jasmine smiled nervously. I almost didn't. Eleanor nodded. I know. Then she invited her to sit down. For the next hour, Eleanor explained everything. Wilson Capital Group was worth over $14 billion and operated across logistics, infrastructure, and investment projects throughout the Midwest. Then she surprised Jasmine. I'm not offering you a promotion. Jasmine frowned. I'm sorry? Eleanor smiled. I don't know you well enough to give you power. The answer caught Jasmine off guard, but she appreciated the honesty. Instead, Eleanor proposed something else. She wanted Jasmine to work inside the company for several weeks. No special treatment, no executive title, no shortcuts. Simply observe, learn, and tell her what she saw. At first, Jasmine thought it was unusual. Then she realized something. Eleanor wasn't testing her skills. She was testing her judgment. The next several days passed quickly. Jasmine rotated through multiple departments, speaking with employees, studying reports, and learning company operations. That was when she noticed something strange. People seemed nervous. Conversations stopped when certain executives walked by. Employees avoided eye contact. Some reports disappeared from shared folders overnight. Then she met Andrew Wilson. Andrew was 50 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, with silver streaks in his dark hair and a sharply defined face that rarely smiled. He kept a perfectly trimmed beard and wore expensive tailored suits every day. To outsiders, he appeared confident and charismatic. But beneath his polished image was a man obsessed with control. Years of growing up under an extraordinarily successful mother had left him carrying invisible insecurities that he disguised with authority. He entered every room expecting obedience. When he met Jasmine, he smiled politely, too politely. Mrs. Wilson seems very interested in you. Jasmine smiled back. I'm just here to learn. Andrew nodded. That's good. Then his expression changed for only half a second. People who learn too much around here sometimes become distracted. The words were subtle, but Jasmine understood. It was a warning. That night she sat alone in her temporary apartment provided by Eleanor. Chicago glowed beyond her window. Something inside her felt unsettled. She could not explain why. The company was successful. The employees were talented. Everything looked perfect. Yet beneath that perfection, she sensed something hidden. And somehow, Andrew Wilson seemed to be standing directly in front of it. 3 weeks passed quietly inside Wilson Capital Group. But Jasmine Carter had learned long ago that silence was often where the biggest problems lived. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise, carrying a notebook instead of a title. Eleanor had intentionally kept her role undefined. Jasmine was neither an executive nor an employee with authority. She was simply an observer. But sometimes, people overlooked observers, and that was exactly what Eleanor wanted. Jasmine spent her days studying logistics reports, employee surveys, shipping schedules, and charitable foundation records connected to the company's community outreach programs. The work itself was not difficult. In fact, she enjoyed it. Organizing complex systems had always been one of her greatest strengths. What troubled her was something she could not explain. The numbers did not feel right. At first, it was something small. A scholarship report showed 6,000 students receiving annual aid. Another report listed only 4,800 students. The difference was too large to be a typo. Jasmine wrote it down. Then she found another discrepancy. Several educational grants appeared to have been paid to organizations that no longer existed. Then another. Then another. 3 days later, she sat alone in a conference room staring at her laptop while rain slid down the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Her heart began beating faster. $483 million. That was the total amount that had disappeared over 7 years. She leaned back in her chair. Nobody simply misplaced nearly $500 million. This was deliberate. Someone had been stealing. Someone had been very careful. And someone had been doing it for a very long time. Jasmine immediately understood something else. If the scheme had survived for 7 years inside a $14 billion company, powerful people had to be involved. She closed her laptop. For the first time since arriving in Chicago, she felt afraid. Not because of the money, because of the people connected to it. That evening, she decided not to tell anyone except Eleanor. As she walked back to her temporary apartment, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street, the same car she had seen 2 nights earlier. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe not. She told herself she was imagining things, but the uneasy feeling stayed with her. The next morning, things became stranger. An entire folder she had saved on her computer was gone. She frowned. She searched every directory. Nothing. Then she checked her email. Several messages had vanished overnight. One message in particular contained notes about the scholarship discrepancies. Gone. Jasmine immediately locked her screen. Someone had accessed her files. That realization sent a chill through her entire body. For years, she had worked ordinary jobs. Nobody had ever cared enough to watch her. Now someone did. That meant she was getting close to something important. Later that afternoon, she met a new employee named Daniel Price. Daniel was 46 years old, an African-American man with broad shoulders, dark brown skin, and a salt and pepper beard that softened his serious features. He had spent 20 years working as an internal compliance manager and was known for his honesty. 3 years earlier, he had lost his wife to breast cancer, and the experience had made him value truth above comfort. He spoke quietly and never enjoyed office politics. As they walked through the hallway, he lowered his voice. "Be careful." Jasmine looked at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel glanced around before answering. "This company wasn't always like this." She waited. "People used to ask questions, now they don't. Why? Because people who ask too many questions eventually disappear." Jasmine stopped walking. He smiled gently. "I don't mean physically, I mean professionally." Then he continued down the hallway. That sentence stayed with her all day. That evening, Eleanor invited Jasmine to dinner at her private residence overlooking Lake Michigan. The house itself surprised her. It was elegant, but not extravagant. Family photographs covered the shelves instead of expensive art. Pictures of grandchildren, vacations, Christmas mornings, a life that looked ordinary despite extraordinary wealth. Eleanor poured tea into 2 cups before sitting down. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Jasmine finally said it. "Someone is stealing from the company." Eleanor did not look surprised. In fact, she almost looked relieved. She nodded slowly. "I was wondering how long it would take you." Jasmine stared at her. "You knew?" Eleanor sighed. "I suspected." The older woman stared toward the dark lake outside. At 72 years old, Eleanor suddenly looked much older than before. The burden she had carried was finally visible. "I built this company over 40 years. Every employee mattered to me. Every scholarship mattered to me. But several years ago, something changed." She paused. "People became afraid." Jasmine listened carefully. Eleanor continued. "I've suspected betrayal for a long time, but I never imagined it had grown this large." Then she looked directly at Jasmine. "There is someone inside my own family that I no longer trust." Jasmine immediately thought of Andrew. But Eleanor did not say his name. Instead, she stood up and walked toward a cabinet. She pulled out a small key. Then she handed it to Jasmine. "This opens a private archive room inside headquarters." Jasmine frowned. "What is in there?" Eleanor answered quietly. "The truth." Then her expression changed. Not fear, not sadness, something worse. Disappointment. Whoever has been doing this already knows someone is investigating them. Jasmine felt her stomach tighten. She looked down at the key resting in her palm. Then she looked back at Eleanor. Outside, the wind coming off Lake Michigan grew stronger. And somewhere else in Chicago, someone was already preparing to stop them. Spring was slowly arriving in Chicago, but inside Wilson Capital Group, the atmosphere had become colder with every passing day. Jasmine Carter had begun to understand something that many people never learned until much later in life. The most dangerous enemies were rarely strangers. More often, they were people who had been standing close to you for years. Over the next 2 weeks, Jasmine and Eleanor quietly worked together without telling anyone else. Every evening, after most employees had gone home, they used the private archive room Eleanor had hidden for years. Inside were old contracts, handwritten notes, and archived communications that had somehow escaped the company's official systems. The deeper Jasmine looked, the clearer the picture became. Andrew Wilson had not acted impulsively. He had planned everything. For 7 years, he had slowly moved loyal executives into retirement. He had replaced department heads with people who answered only to him. He had created layers of shell companies that moved money through educational charities and consulting firms before sending it elsewhere. It was sophisticated, it was patient, and it was terrifying. One evening, Jasmine sat across from Eleanor in the archive room while stacks of documents covered the table between them. "How did this happen?" Jasmine asked softly. Eleanor stared at an old photograph. The picture showed a much younger version of herself standing beside Andrew when he was around 12 years old. "I was too busy building something for future generations," Eleanor said quietly. "I didn't realize my own son had become obsessed with owning it." She sighed deeply. When Andrew was 17, his father died unexpectedly from a heart attack. He never truly recovered. Instead of grieving, he became obsessed with control. Somewhere along the way, he started believing this company belonged to him. Jasmine listened carefully. For the first time, she felt sadness for Andrew, not sympathy, but sadness. Some people spent their entire lives trying to fill wounds that money could never heal. Unfortunately, Andrew had chosen the wrong path. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at headquarters and immediately sensed something was wrong. Employees were whispering. People avoided eye contact. Even Daniel Price looked nervous. He approached her quietly. "You should prepare yourself." "For what?" "Andrew called an emergency investor meeting tomorrow." Jasmine's stomach tightened. She knew exactly what that meant. He was ready to make his move. The following day, more than 300 employees, executives, investors, and board members gathered inside the company's largest auditorium. The room buzzed with uncertainty. Andrew stood confidently at the center stage. He wore a dark charcoal suit and a silver tie. His posture was flawless, but Jasmine noticed something she had not seen before. Desperation. Not fear, desperation. The desperation of someone who knew his window of opportunity was closing. He smiled politely. "Thank you all for coming." Large screens lit up behind him. Then Jasmine's photograph appeared. The entire room grew silent. Andrew began speaking. "Over the past several weeks, confidential information has been leaked from inside our company." Murmurs spread throughout the audience. He continued. "Unfortunately, an outside consultant was given access to sensitive information and abused that trust." Jasmine sat frozen. Then her name appeared beneath the image. Some employees gasped. Others simply stared. Andrew lowered his voice. "It pains me to say this, but Ms. Jasmine Carter acted without authorization, created unnecessary panic, and damaged the reputation of this company." Jasmine could almost feel hundreds of eyes turning toward her. For a brief moment, her body wanted to retreat. Her chest tightened. Her hands trembled. Then she remembered her mother. Truth does not become false simply because many people believe a lie. She sat upright. Across the room, Daniel Price gave her a small nod. Not everyone believed Andrew, but many did. Andrew continued. "To protect this company, I am recommending immediate leadership changes." The screens behind him shifted again. There it was, a legal proposal, temporary transfer of authority, chairman succession procedures. Everything had already been prepared. Then someone stood up. "Where is Eleanor Wilson?" Andrew smiled. "Unfortunately, due to health concerns, Mrs. Wilson is unavailable." The room exploded into whispers. Jasmine immediately grabbed her phone. No messages, no missed calls. She texted Rebecca Hayes. Nothing. She called, straight to voicemail. Then she called Eleanor. Nothing. A chill ran down her spine. For the first time since arriving in Chicago, she felt genuine fear. Eleanor had disappeared. Nobody knew where she was. Nobody could reach her. Suddenly, Jasmine understood why Andrew looked so confident. This had always been his final move. He was removing Eleanor from the equation. Then he would destroy Jasmine's credibility. Then he would inherit everything. The $14 billion empire, the scholarships, the foundation, the entire legacy. As the meeting ended, investors gathered around Andrew. He shook hands, he smiled. He looked victorious. Meanwhile, Jasmine stood alone in the middle of the auditorium. For only a few seconds, she allowed herself to feel defeated. Then she remembered something Eleanor had told her days earlier. If people become desperate, it usually means they're running out of time. Jasmine slowly looked up. Andrew was smiling too much. He was moving too fast, which meant one thing. He was afraid of something, and whatever that something was. It had not disappeared with Eleanor Wilson. A week after Eleanor Wilson disappeared, Chicago woke up to one of the biggest business stories in recent memory. News vans lined the streets outside Wilson Capital Group, while reporters gathered near the entrance before sunrise. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone knew something important was about to change. Inside the building, Andrew Wilson stood confidently inside the grand auditorium that his mother had once used to announce scholarships, charitable initiatives, and employee celebrations. Today, he intended to use that same stage to secure ownership of the empire she had spent 40 years building. Andrew looked calm on the outside. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his silver tie sat neatly against his white shirt, and his expression projected complete confidence. But deep inside, anxiety was growing. For the first time in years, he was moving too quickly, and people who moved too quickly often made mistakes. Jasmine Carter sat quietly near the back of the room. She had barely slept for several days. Her mind was exhausted, but she refused to give up. She kept replaying Eleanor's final words. If people become desperate, it usually means they're running out of time. Jasmine held on to those words. At exactly 10 o'clock, Andrew stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. After careful consideration and due to ongoing health concerns affecting Mrs. Eleanor Wilson, we are implementing a transition plan to ensure stability for the future of Wilson Capital Group. Several investors nodded. Others looked uncertain. Andrew continued speaking. Then the doors behind him opened. The entire room became silent. Eleanor Wilson walked inside. The 72-year-old widow wore a navy blue coat and carried herself with the same quiet dignity Jasmine had first seen at the airport in Detroit. But today, there was something different in her eyes. There was resolve. Walking beside her were 4 federal investigators. The lead investigator was Marcus Reynolds, a 58-year-old African-American man with broad shoulders, deep brown skin, silver hair at his temples, and a neatly trimmed beard. He had spent 30 years working in financial crime investigations and had earned a reputation for patience and honesty. 20 years earlier, he had helped expose a major corruption case involving public education funds, and since then, he had devoted his career to protecting organizations that served vulnerable communities. The entire auditorium erupted into whispers. Andrew froze. For the first time since Jasmine had met him, he looked genuinely afraid. Eleanor walked calmly onto the stage. "Good morning, Andrew," he swallowed. "Mother," she interrupted him. "No. Today you will address me as Chairwoman Wilson." The room fell silent again. Marcus Reynolds stepped forward. "We have obtained warrants related to an ongoing financial investigation." Gasps spread through the crowd. Then large screens behind the stage came to life. One by one, evidence appeared. Shell companies, fake contracts, secret bank transfers, audio recordings, emails, 7 years of manipulation, 7 years of theft, 7 years of deception. The room was stunned. Jasmine watched investors stare at the screens in disbelief. Then one audio recording began playing. Andrew's own voice echoed throughout the auditorium. "Once my mother is declared incapable of leading, everything becomes mine." Another recording followed. "We'll blame the outside consultant if necessary. Nobody will question it." Jasmine felt her chest tighten. For a brief moment, she remembered sitting alone at Detroit Airport with $23 in her bank account. It was impossible to believe how far life had carried her. Andrew looked around desperately. Nobody was standing beside him anymore. Not his executives, not his allies, not even the board members. Marcus Reynolds stepped forward. "Andrew Wilson, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, and obstruction of an ongoing investigation." 2 agents approached him. Andrew did not fight. Instead, he looked at Eleanor. "Everything I did because this should have been mine." Eleanor's eyes filled with sadness. "No, Andrew, you stopped building a legacy and started chasing ownership." Those were the last words she said to him. Minutes later, he was escorted from the building. The room remained silent. Some employees cried. Others simply sat in shock. Then Eleanor walked toward Jasmine. She smiled. The same smile Jasmine had seen on the airplane ticket night. "Thank you." Jasmine shook her head. "You don't owe me anything." Eleanor laughed softly. "That is exactly why I trust you." Then she addressed everyone in the room. "Today, I am officially retiring." The audience immediately turned toward Jasmine, but Eleanor shook her head. "I'm not handing this company to Jasmine Carter." Everyone looked surprised. Then Eleanor smiled again. "I'm giving her something more valuable, a future." She explained that Jasmine would enter a long-term executive training program and eventually become a leader when she was ready. Jasmine almost cried. For the first time in years, someone was investing in her future instead of demanding she sacrifice it. 1 year later, Detroit Metropolitan Airport looked exactly the same. Snow drifted gently outside. Travelers hurried between gates. Jasmine, now wearing a navy coat and carrying a leather briefcase, sat quietly near a window waiting for her flight. Then she noticed a young mother standing at the counter. The woman appeared to be around 30 years old. She was Hispanic, with dark brown hair pulled into a tired bun, and a little girl holding her hand. Her eyes were filled with panic. She didn't have enough money for a ticket. Jasmine smiled. Then she stood up. She walked over and placed her boarding pass in the woman's hand. The mother immediately began to protest. Jasmine simply smiled. "I know." Then she said something she would never forget. "Life shouldn't punish kindness." The woman stared at her. Jasmine smiled one final time. Somewhere inside her purse was an old white business card she would never throw away. And somewhere inside her heart lived a lesson she would carry forever. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness does not change one life. Sometimes it changes generations.